being here. We're going to have a discussion here amongst ourselves a little bit, and then we're going to throw it open to questions. Ken and Ben, thank you for having the world premiere here. I just want to start with you guys, which is why did you make this film, and did you know what you were getting into?
Maybe I'll take this one. I'm not sure that we knew what we were getting into. This film was 4 years in the making, and Ken and I had worked together for several years before that, doing work for hire type of things, History Channel specials and museum films. But as we were working together, we were talking about Israel-Palestine, and we knew that we wanted to make an independent documentary about this issue. And we heard rumblings in the community about a organization called J Street, and we were fascinated. We wanted to, there's a question for us, right? What was this organization all about? What was motivating them? Why were they so controversial? And so it became kind of our project to follow them and see if they could change the equation.
Okay, so you had no idea what you were getting into. Got it.
I said that.
Okay.
Clearly.
I also want to introduce, they need no introduction, but Rabbi Levenberg from Temple Sinai and the Rabbinic Council, and Lois Frank, who's been deeply involved in many both local and national Jewish organizations, are here. Brad, you were on the programming committee, so obviously choosing this film has been somewhat controversial for the festival. Why show this film?
It's a great question, David. I think the beauty of the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival is that one of the primary purposes is to start a conversation or to participate in some way in conversations that impact the Jewish community. Simply the fact that there is a question about whether J Street is considered pro-Israel or not pro-Israel, how to deal with J Street, how to sort of process J Street, really is core to the greater Jewish community at present. The AJFF having this film in the festival guarantees that we're not shying away from the conversation, but rather we're using this as a vehicle to inform our dialogue and to better continue the conversations that may have happened either just amongst friends or off-site.
Lois, you were not a supporter of J Street, but what's your view of the organization and of this film?
I don't think the film is controversial at all. I think it was wonderful and informative and insightful. In terms of the organized Jewish community, my background is with the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, which is a consensus-building national organization with 24 national organizations like Hadassah and Council and ORT, a number of organizations, 24, that come together and are consensus building. And the criteria for being in the big tent of the organized Jewish community is really twofold. One is that you believe in a democratic, secure Jewish state of Israel, and two, that you reject the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. These were the two criteria that would allow you to be inside the big tent. And actually, J Street fits both those criteria. So where I don't think a lot of this film was spent on kind of the importance and the passion of having a two-state solution, and how this is really driving, and the peace process is really driving J Street. The fact is, there are many, many organizations that have that as their driving passion as well. And when I speak personally, my own personal view is with the strategy, not with the philosophy. I wholly agree with what they're saying. It's just the tactics where I differ, personally, and I'm not saying that as my organization.
Ken, let me go to you. In the process of making this film, which was certainly a labor of love rather than a labor of commerce, what was the most surprising part for you about the passion that the opponents of J Street felt? What surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most? I think that what surprised me the most was I think how offended people were by J Street and the misconceptions that from the experiences that we were having filming versus what you would hear other people say about who J Street was and what they were doing.
Give me an example.
Well, there was all kinds of stuff early on when we were researching that you would read, and they were funded by Hamas, and that all kinds of just really incendiary, silly things, frankly, and then I just think these kind of scenes that you see in Florida, where this kind of this is obviously this is not an easy topic, right? I mean, this touches a nerve. We know it's touching a nerve. That's why we wanted to do a film about it. But it seems to hit a button within the American Jewish community like no other, and it just seems. I was just surprised about how people couldn't engage, and it just went to a very kind of. It went to an extremely emotional place extremely quickly.
Lois and Brad, we see examples throughout the Jewish community around the country of varieties of debates about what are we allowed to talk about, whether it's the Open Hillel movement and many other examples, J Street being one of them. For either of you, for both of you, how does what this film shows fit into that question that many Jews are debating amongst themselves about what are we allowed to talk about?
Thanks, Lois. Happy to take that one. All right, so significantly more controversial than, say, Deli Man. The questions that are raised are really questions of the relevancy of the Jewish community and the organizations that the Jewish community supports. We ask questions like, what does it mean to be pro-Israel? We ask questions like, what is the role of the diaspora in a strong Israel? And depending on how we answer those questions may ultimately define whether or not we support organizations like J Street. By the way, the one piece of the film that I found the most disturbing, and I know, David, you didn't ask this question yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and answer it anyway.
Thank you for predicting what my question
was the part towards the beginning where it was almost contrasting J Street with AIPAC. As someone who supports both organizations, I think it's entirely feasible and possible to I don't even want to say have one foot in each camp. It's just to realize that the conversations that happen about what it means to be pro-Israel are not monolithic today. While at one time they may have been, today they're just not. And today we happen to live, thankfully, in a very vibrant and very exciting Jewish community. One that has many ways of being pro-Israel and connecting to Israel and finding relevancy with Israel. And we don't have to necessarily declare allegiance to one organization over another. And in fact, can often find ourselves aligned with many pro-Israel organizations on the horizon.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here because I think there are some distinctions, and I think it boils down to our struggles really as Jews in diaspora in terms of what our role is and how much we can enter into the political process in Israel. I think we have I think we have every right to enter into who is a Jew issue. It's part of our peoplehood. I think there is a distinction on how much we enter into the security issues and the political outcomes in Israel, which is a democracy. They've elected their government, and They have their government policies. So while I am aligned with the, when I say progressive views of J Street, I've drawn the line personally in not wanting to lobby the American government in a position that may not be that of the Israeli government. Anyway.
Okay. Let's throw it open to questions. We have two people with microphones. Raise your hands. I just want to state from the beginning that this is a place for questions. We have a very limited time period. If you feel like making a speech or taking time away from everybody else who is here to ask questions, if you make a speech, I will cut you off. Also, the Southeast representative of J Street is here and is very happy to hear your speeches outside afterwards. So with that said, I have a question over here on the left.
I want to say, I thought the film was good, but a little fluffy. It didn't really hit what I consider to be the key issues, two of which were raised by the cab driver, which is, and there was no response to that, either in the cab or later, but he said, you have to live here to understand, and we don't live there. I don't believe I can understand the realities unless I do. And I think he was right, and I'd like to have heard a response to that. Secondly, he raised the issue of they don't want peace. What do you do if they don't want peace? And that's a reality that should be addressed. Maybe it wasn't your intention in the film to delve, but to me that's a critical underlying issue that has to be dealt with.
Who do you mean by they? I'm going to ask you because I don't know who they are when I'm in Lebanon and they talk about the Jews as they. I don't know who you mean when you say they.
I mean a sufficient number of 100 million people around Israel who support and use the Palestinians for political ends and use Israel as a whipping boy and a scapegoat. So the political will in the Arab world, I believe, it should have been explored. I don't know if they want peace. That's an interesting question.
But this is a film about, not to defend these filmmakers, but it's a film about an organization, an American organization in a 2-year period. It's not a film about the whole thing. I mean, I just want to make sure the question is relevant to the film as much as possible.
It is.
I think it is relevant to the film, and I think that if you want to do a fluff piece on true believers, then that's accomplished. And I don't want to minimize it by saying a fluff piece, but it showed the true believing nature of these people, and I don't question their integrity or their sincerity or their motives. But I would have liked to have seen responses and delving into that issue, both of those issues. The third issue, because I think it's silent on 4, is the effects of the U.S. imposing its will on Israel. And obviously, as Lois said, the Israeli people have spoken in a democracy. I don't agree with the settlements. I don't agree with a lot that Israel does. But I don't agree with a lot that any country does. And so the question is, do we have the right to impose our will on a democratic country and not impose our will on many non-democratic countries throughout the Middle East? Fourth, I wonder,
there are a lot of people who want to ask questions. You've got 3. I think that's enough. Gentlemen, the filmmakers, would you care to respond to the 3 questions we have on the table thus far?
Well, I think that, look, I think that there are people out in the world that want peace and that want to have their children and their families have better lives than they have. And I think that those people are Palestinians and Israelis and Americans and Saudis and Lebanese and all over the world. I fundamentally believe that. I also believe that there are people out there in the world that don't want peace. But I'm going to live my life trying to find all those other people that want peace. As as for, that was the one that I really keyed in on. You had a lot going on there. As for, I don't think that anybody's advocating for the United States to impose their will on another people. I think that what we're trying to say with the film, and I should add, and we probably should have had it already, thanks to Atlanta Jewish Film Festival for having us here and for engaging in this dialogue to begin with. This is about the fact that in the American Jewish community, there are different people with different opinions, and they feel like those opinions have been stifled, and that we are a democracy, and we are allowed to engage in a civic constructive debate about how we feel about these issues, just like we're allowed to engage in a civic discussion about how we feel about what happens in many countries. So I don't know that anybody's advocating for the imposing of a will.
That's what lobbying is.
Next question.
Well, thank you very much for this film. I want to tell you that I came here not particularly sympathetic to J Street, but interested in learning their position. I want to address an issue with the filmmaking, however. This is a documentary telling us about the formation of a lobbying organization that represents a relatively small percentage of the American Jewish community. However, in the opener, in the historical setup, I was very, very disturbed by the jump from the formation of Israel to an announcement that the Six-Day War was in fact a massive overtake by showing phantom jets taking over Sinai and occupying the rest of the territory without any prodrome, and describing what led to the Six-Day War. Very prejudiced from the very beginning, and you lost me for the rest of the movie because of that.
I'm sorry to hear that. I wish that you could have gotten through that and tried to see some other valuable information in there.
I just wanted to say one more thing about that, which, yeah, I mean, we saw you shaking your head throughout the entire movie. So, you know, in making this movie for a broader audience, we felt like we had to set the table. This really wasn't so much a movie for this audience, who presumably comes to this issue much more well-informed. So, you know, that was the goal there, was to set the table in terms of having people who aren't so familiar understand how we have an occupied territory. Because that's a fundamental thing that people need to understand this movie. And we had to do that with a lot of things so that people would understand what J Street's doing. That was one of the challenges of the film.
Left side.
I found that the movie, I think the producers did a very good job explaining what J Street is all about. What I would have hoped that the movie would have done was similar to what Temple Sinai did, and Brad was probably there, when earlier last year they brought in Jeremy Ben-Ami to speak, but at the same time had Daniel Gordis come in to be able to talk about basically why he felt that a lot of the J Street's positions are naive. And I would have liked to have seen some balance there from the other side. Also, what I also found was the movie basically portrayed the only people that supported a J Street solution, a two-state solution, was J Street and the Democrats. They had all kinds of politicians up there from the left side talking about a two-state solution, and that's good. But they had no Republicans up there who, all of them also are looking for a two-state solution and are also looking and supporting Israel. So I would have liked to have seen that. Also, I found that it made it look like Israel were the only albatross to getting peace settled, when in fact we all know that Hamas and there's all kinds of things which are being done by the other side. In my opinion, that's the real reason why nothing is being done. So I would have liked to have seen that. Maybe I can comment on
that. Ben, Ken, your response.
You know, we were interested in making a film that looked at J Street's journey. that's the film. So, balancing the conversation is a difficult one. We try to include, and I think we included a tremendous amount of critique against them from different people. It's not a sit-down conversation between Jeremy and Daniel Gordis, and it can't, that's, which might be an interesting project too, but that's not the project that we were interested in making.
Okay, on the right, and then back to the left. Geographic. Stage right.
Having been in Israel recently and sitting around a dining room table with a bunch of Israelis who had diverse opinions like in this room, I find it so disheartening that we as Jews think just because somebody thinks differently than we do, that we have no voice. I applaud what you have done. You are giving a voice to some people who have no voice, whether it's the voice that I have, the voice that you have, but it's a voice they have. I also know, thank you very much, that many of the people in there were very young, and many of the people in this audience is very old. There is a difference, and I'm sure you've addressed that, and I'm very excited, so that's it. I thank you for making the movie.
Well, let me broaden this out to Brad and Lois. The issue of young Jews being disconnected from Israel is a very, very large and important issue. What you're mentioning is measured in all kinds of ways. That young Jews, whether it's my daughters who went on birthright this, past summer, or you name it, just don't care. Lois, Brad, talk to me about how you see fitting that fitting into what this film and J Street are about.
Well, first of all, on behalf of Lois and myself, I just want to, acknowledge and thank all of the older people who decided to attend the film tonight. In all honesty and with all candor, there's enough debate within the Jewish community that the fact that you chose to attend the film and the fact that you chose to be here tonight speaks volumes to not only your own openness to at least be present for part of the conversation, and also your belief in the power of film to be able to convey the conversation. So thank you for not only coming, but also for staying long after your popcorn has come to an end. As far as the question, I would say, look, we as Jewish communal leaders, we are constantly working to understand how to make Israel relevant to the next generation of specifically of Jews. I firmly believe, and I know Lois agrees 100%, that it is impossible to be Jewish in the 21st century without having some sort of Israel as part of your Jewish identity. Now, what that means and how that's expressed is part of the conversation. And for a very long time, into a few generations, the conversation was Israel was always going to be our plan B. When those who rise up against us, we always have Israel to whom we can turn, and it is always our safe place to which we can go. I think that there's an increasingly younger demographic of Jews who don't want to see Israel as a plan B, but rather who gravitate towards Israel being this living, breathing, exciting, country, and full of its own innovations, and we strive to tell the story of what it means to support Israel, of what it means to have a connection to Israel, and part of that means that we have to acknowledge at least part of the story, in that there are some decisions that Israel makes that may not be aligned with how we would want Israel to decide. You can disagree with Israel and still be pro-Israel, and that's part of the conversation.
On the left, Stage left.
Keeping on just talk about the younger generation, I was curious to know why there was no mention of J Street on campus.
That was, the film could only be so long, and it was, we explored that, and it just was something that we couldn't get into in terms of the structure of, we shot over 100 hours worth of material for this, including stuff with Daniel Gordis, and you can just, some stuff's gotta go. So I think what we try to do, this subject of the next generation, and this is a kind of an argument that Dershowitz has against J Street, is that it's an ageist movement, right? They're really interested in just an ageist movement. And it's a topic, obviously, that Peter Beinart has done a tremendous amount of work on. And so as we were constructing the film, that is who Amy represents, right? And unfortunately this had to get cut too, but her grandparents are Holocaust survivors. She was raised in a conservative household. She went to APAC conferences. I mean, she was your kind of, she was a very mainstream Jew. But she never felt like she wanted more. And she found that at J Street, and she found that allowed her to express her dissatisfaction with the policies of the State of Israel in the same way, and at a time when many people were expressing their dissatisfaction with the policies of the Bush administration here. Now, interestingly enough, Amy is now one of the spokespeople for Mayor de Blasio's administration in New York City. So that's what she's gone on to. Similarly, Karine is also a young, vibrant personality. She also has left J Street since we completed the film. She's doing stuff with MoveOn.org now and some other organizations. So the U's were just a place that we explored, but we just didn't find enough there.
I'd like to jump in for just 1 second. Something that's concerning me greatly. I can't tell you how many young Jews are impassioned by Israel or care about it, but I can tell you there's a growing movement that concerns me very much, which is a group of very caring, humanitarian young people who have been disenchanted with Israel's behavior and have started another organization, Jewish Voices for Peace, which has a growing presence on some of the campuses, particularly in California. And these are young people who say we don't need a Jewish state of Israel. We need a pluralistic state that's democratic in the Middle East where Jews and Palestinians can live together in one state, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. And there are a group of radical Jews on the other side that say maybe it isn't so radical. A group of Jews who say, this is our land, it goes back to biblical times. We deserve Israel from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. I'm worried that we need those in the center to be able to talk civilly to each other, to try to come up with at least common ground. We don't have to agree on everything. And I would say that the government of Israel today probably says they say they're pro-Israel, they're pro-peace. It's just when and by what means and what's the strategy. I do want to tell you, for those who are concerned about the civil society in Israel today, there are vehicles where you can enter into the process in Israel. If you're concerned about the minority Palestinian population within Israel's borders, or you're concerned about the issue of the Aguna, or the Bedouin, there are civil organizations that deal with these problems, and it gives you an opportunity to help change the civil society. And one of them happens to be the New Israel Fund, but the New Israel Fund funds many, many organizations. But the idea is we can have a voice in the internal values within the state of Israel. They don't necessarily have to be through the political arena here.
There was a movement to try to get some microphones to the back. So
I've got one here.
Okay. I see one at the back. Okay. Sorry.
There's something very misleading about this film, and also even the discussion tonight. Throughout, we keep hearing the term two-state solution. What you never hear during this whole thing is that the present Israeli government has repeatedly stated, and Netanyahu himself has stated, he supports a two-state solution. If you were to watch this film, you would never know it, nor to listen to this. You would think that the Israeli government opposes the two-state solution. It does not. And I think it's very misleading, and in terms of the bias, to some extent, of this movie. And I think it needs fixing. Thank you.
I'm not sure what the question is, but is there a response?
No comment.
A question, please.
Yeah, I'd like to compliment you on a beautifully done film, and I thought it was a great recruitment film. I know that it was not done under the budget of J Street, and I know it did get some seed money from an incubator, but the money that funded this film, is it exactly the same or almost exactly the same source that funds J Street itself? Was this not just basically a recruitment film? And also,
Are you signing up? Did we get you to sign up to J Street? You going out there and cutting a check? No. The answer is no.
What percentages?
What percentage?
What percentages of the same people that have the same?
I have no idea. I couldn't even begin to tell you. Look, you're referring to the Kickstarter campaign? What exactly are you referring to?
Whatever the incubator is.
So Kickstarter is a publicly crowdsourced funding
absolutely.
platform.
That was a small portion of it. I'm just wondering what the other portion, what percentage of it was really, in a sense, J Street funding, although not under their budget.
Well, let me just ask you a question. As a filmmaker who's
0%.
constantly trying to raise money, the only people who give me money are people who are interested in the subject of the film that I'm making for. Whether it was a film about APAC or whether it was a film about whaling, it would be people who care about it.
Recruitment,
right?
Those people that want to recruit.
So any film, so therefore any film is a recruitment film? I'm not really sure. I mean, the logic of the question, I understand what you're getting at, but in any situation where someone's raising money, you get money from people who care about the subject.
Absolutely true, but it also
and I'd love to make a
reflects
film
the
that you like
bias
fun.
of the film.
Truthfully, I'm just going to jump in here, though I probably shouldn't, and just say, if this is a recruitment film for J Street,
they should be fired.
Yeah, I don't know that I would sign up. This is not a film that, in my estimation, portrayed J Street in a golden light at the pot at the end of the rainbow. I think the film illustrated some of the challenges that J Street is facing and highlighted the questions about J Street. And in fact, what I love about the film, and thank you both for doing this, is it raised a lot of questions and deliberately did not answer them. Leaving it up to us to be able to determine whether we think this film conveyed or portrayed some of J Street's successes or some of their defeats, whether there's what the next step is for J Street, whether we would want to be part of an organization that at the very least has shown some of its warts in the film, and at the greatest isn't able to acknowledge some of the criticisms leveled in the film against the organization. It's a lot of open-ended. It's a lot of discussion for us to be able to have, so thank you.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Stage left.
I may risk sounding slightly ignorant. However, I was unaware of J Street and knew little on this political issue, but I found it very insightful and informative, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. On the right.
Yeah. I wanted to piggyback on a couple of comments that were made and ask a question about the evolution. You were filming sort of the history and the evolution of the organization. Could you tell me if and when Jeremy Ben-Ami or some of the other leaders went to the other pro-Israel, pro-Zionist organizations and if they were rejected by them with what they were You know, I mean, they said that they didn't feel powerful. Well, maybe I'd like to know if they tried to influence the other pro-Israel organizations, or did they just decide on their own that they weren't going to be acceptable, or their position?
That's a good question. I think that's a question for J Street, not for us. I don't know the answer to.
And I'm just going to point out that the director of the Southeast is in the fourth row here. Raise your hand. You can ask him that question.
And it's clear, and Jeremy says it in the movie, that he felt dissatisfied with the existing Jewish organizations in America because he felt that they weren't looking at the need for a two-state solution as the five-alarm fire that it is. And I think that's primarily what drove Jeremy to start J Street.
There were and are some organizations like Americans for Peace Now or Shalom Achshav that exist, and some blended in and came in with J Street when they started. I don't know what the politics are now.
And I think J Street sees itself as different in that they are kind of in the halls of power. They're trying to affect change on the political level.
And I'm told we have time for one more question. I see a hand on the stage left.
With the microphone, I'm not sure I need it.
Hi, thank you. I actually have a question. What's the next step for this film? How are you going to market it? Who is the market for the film? 3 questions, actually.
This is our premiere, so we are going to a couple more festivals after this that we have lined up, and we also have a distributor. So that's kind of where things are at. We're looking.
So it's been broadcast in Japan.
Right. There's Japan.
On one of the major networks of Japan. J Street is really big in Japan. And we actually had a number of calls from folks. As soon as the AJFF website went live, the email box filled up pretty quick with other festivals from, from South America to Australia that were really interested. I mean, I think that, part of the audience for this film, when we were creating it, is not just to stir a lively conversation like the one that we just had here within our own community, but also, the rest of the world sees the American Jewish community as pretty singular, monolithic in their beliefs, and that showing this kind of conversation that's happening to the rest of the world there's a lot of interest there that we're finding. And that's been true throughout the whole phase of the project, or all phases of the project.
Thank you very much for the world premiere. Thank you, audience, for provocative questions. And the filmmakers will be in the lobby.